Welcome to Stories on Stage Online Edition. I'm Monique Mulligan, and today I'm chatting with David Roland about his book, The Power of Suffering. This one's published by Simon & Schuster. David has a PhD in clinical psychology and is the founding member of Compassionate Mind Australia. His latest book is an investigation into the nature of human suffering and digs into the lived experience of 11 incredible people, as well as his own. These stories highlight an ability for some people to rise, and they come with insights that we can all gain from. David, welcome to Stories on Stage.
Great to be with you, Monique, and thank you for your interest in my book and through this program supporting other Australian writers and their books.
Thank you. It's really been great, isn't it? You know, the way that's all come about, us all, looking to help each other in different ways. So.
Yes, and struggling with those little technical issues that
Yes.
we never had to deal with before.
Yeah, that's right. We've learnt a lot, haven't we? Yeah. David, I want to thank you actually for writing this book. It's so insightful and thought-provoking for me personally. I think because I've often wondered why people experience great suffering and they continue to grow and to grow in their spirit and to give back to others even, and some don't. So as a person, a writer who likes to observe people myself, that aspect of it was really fascinating, even just reading the blurb. So you write in the introduction that it was curiosity that led you to digging deep into the realm of suffering. And I wondered if you could start by telling us a little bit about that and what led you to this point of curiosity.
Well, I think I was born with curiosity. I don't think I can help that. And some people do have a more curious asking or questing nature. And I suggest that that's probably one of the qualities that helps people move through their suffering. However, in this particular instance, I had been through quite a bit of intense suffering myself through some experiences like developing post-traumatic stress disorder from my previous work, having a stroke, and then in the middle of the global financial crisis, not being able to work, so we lost our life savings, and then a divorce and, separation. And I think, it took about 5 or 6 years for those things to happen, and that's what I would call a bad run.
That is, yeah.
And I got much better again, and that was the subject of my memoir, which was a form of giving back because lots of people had helped me get through that. And I think what happened was I noticed that after a time I had changed for the better. I actually liked the new me, although I still had some restrictions from, the things that happened in the past, and I couldn't undo the past. And that's the very question we're touching on here is things happen to us that we don't ask for them, but when they do, what do we make of that? And because I changed in what felt like to be for the better, I was curious, what is that process that this intense suffering does to you? How does it shake you up? And then when the pieces fall to the ground again, that somehow they're remade into a different way that you might find is actually positive.
I think that was something that was really an interesting starting point, for you and for me as that reader, because you talk about in chapter 2 about whether you can truly know someone else's suffering, and how can you if you haven't tasted that exact suffering for yourself. And then you write that it's one thing to intellectually understand with somebody and say, I understand what it's like to, lose everything in the global financial crisis, but they can never really taste what it's like for you. And I suppose, and so it sits then with that sufferer to try and communicate something that they don't necessarily know how to communicate, and for the other person to try to sit with something they don't fully understand. So maybe I thought this would be a really good place for you to talk about that difference between pain and suffering.
Yes, it's a useful distinction. We need to acknowledge that pain is a necessary part of life. Reluctantly, it is. So, if we step on a nail, it hurts, and that alerts us to do something about an injury that we wouldn't notice otherwise. So physical pain and emotional pain is just simply part of our physiology. When someone we love dies, we grieve, and we don't say that type of pain is wrong. We just say that's a normal part of being a human being, because we're very connected, very social beings. But suffering is when we layer other things on top of the pain. So my simple definition for what suffering is, after my investigation, is it's an ill at ease with what is, when what is can't be any other way, at least for the time being. So if we've lost a loved one, or we've lost a job because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can't change that. So we can grieve the loss. That's very natural and that's quite healthy. But how long do we keep sort of hankering for how things were? Or how long do we say, okay, I can still grieve, but I need to go on and develop new opportunities or create new things? And that's where we make this decision. Do we stay stuck in the suffering, or do we forge a new path? And that eventually leads us to growth.
That's a really good point, that coming to that decision, that moment of, that fork in the road kind of thing, that they've both experienced, two people can experience the same thing. They could both lose the same loved one and be absolutely blindsided by that event or that stimulus or whatever has happened to them. But their reaction and their journey going forward into the future can just be so different. And you see that played out every day, don't you?
Yes. And natural disasters are a good example of that. You could have in the same community or even in the same family somebody going through a natural disaster like the bushfires, they lose their home. And one member of the family or one family compared to their neighbours might actually come to acceptance and then make some decisions that, propel them towards the future. And others are still stuck in, how things were and not getting through that sense of loss.
Yeah, they're really good examples and really timely when you think of the bushfires. And for me, I was over on the other side of the country, and I felt this real sense of despair during that time, because I had loved ones on the other side of the country, so there was that worry and concern. But it was like you could just, for myself, I could pick up that sort of collective sadness and that grief. But for other people, they were living through it, and some of them having to fight for their homes and their properties and everything they owned. And you just saw so many different responses, and some are, normal, like grief and anger and those kind of things. But then you see the people who come and they help and they do, and that was, there's some beautiful stories came out of that.
Yeah, so a lot of beauty can come out of disaster, for sure.
Yeah, that's right. It's just it just doesn't always happen, and it's such a breath of fresh air when it does. Yeah. So if suffering, I suppose it can really bring us to our knees and make us question everything. And you've talked about that, how you asked questions, and for some people. And I know that I've even been in that situation where you think, what's the point? Why do I keep on going, when I feel this way, and when, either the suffering I can't let go or something. But you then write about post-traumatic growth, and I wondered if you can explain a little bit about what that is.
Well, it's a huge topic, of course.
Yes.
But what I wanted to achieve through the book was really write about lived experience and the wisdom of people that had been through lived experience, and then connect that with a field that's called post-traumatic growth. We don't need to look far. People have written about, all the major religions write about suffering as a form of growth or potential growth. So it's been around with the human species for as long as we know. But there is this new field called post-traumatic growth. And trauma is defined in a broad sense, which we might explain as just simply a major life upheaval. And what is a major life upheaval for one person may just be a bump in the road for someone else. And there's reasons why that would be. But the research field, anyway, has discovered that there's at least 5 domains, and I actually think there's a 6, but 5 domains in which people can grow. And they're things like developing much stronger personal connections, like really valuing connections a lot more, and connecting with a wider range of people than before, and maybe having deeper connections. And that's certainly something that I've experienced. Also, opening to new possibilities. Okay, so the way life was before is not going to go back to being how it was, but what can I do now? What new opportunities are there now? Like if you've lost your career for one reason or another, what alternatives are there? And they can be really exciting and things that you never imagined. Another one is a greater appreciation for life. And people often describe just being really valuing the simple things in life, things that they hadn't noticed before. And I think a lot of us perhaps realized or experienced that with the pandemic and the slowdown of the pandemic, we were noticing ordinary everyday things. People were saying just being in their home, enjoying their home in ways they hadn't enjoyed before, doing cooking, all those sorts of things. Another one is just that sense of personal courage. If I could go through that, well, what couldn't I go through? So having less anxiety about the future. And the 5th one is a greater spiritual awareness. And I think it's actually very healthy to look beyond the everyday meanings of life and look for deeper things like values, meaning in life. And that's what I would call a spiritual values, looking at the we rather than just the I. The 6th one for me is, greater development of compassion. And we saw that, as you said, in the bushfires, where people could see the suffering of others and they were acting on it. That's what compassion is acting to relieve suffering.
Yeah. That's a really good way to sort of, I suppose, in a very short way, just describe what post-traumatic growth is and what those sort of elements are. But you then went further and you interviewed 11 people, actually more people, but you have some key stories in this book where you've got a chapter for each one. And these people have had, the stories were so shocking. Some of them just made me cry. Some of them made me have to put the book down and walk away. And because you're reading about people who lose their family in a car crash, and then somebody who's shockingly beaten up by her boyfriend, and she's a teenager and now has some very physical and emotional and mental difficulties to deal with for the rest of her life. And then there was the story of Morris and he, losing his sight at the age of 12, and then his brother lost his sight, and then, more and more things happening.
Other things kept happening.
My goodness, that story, I just thought, oh, this poor man. But actually, I will just add in there, I loved the little snippet in there about him going to the UK with his 87-year-old friend. I thought that was just so funny, imagining.
He was also blind.
Yeah, that's right. Both of them blind. and
blind leading the blind. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I guess, so for me, reading those was quite an experience in itself. I found them something to learn from, but also something to really think about, how things can be for other people and what people are suffering. How did you select those stories?
Yes. I say in answer to that question that I've got two ways of selecting the stories. One, the psychologist in me wanted to select a range of different types of life events, like a natural disaster, like a domestic violence event. There's a refugee story. There's the blind story. So I wanted to have a range of events. So that was the psychologist in me looking out for those. But the writer in me was looking for strong voices, voices that were distinctive, that could explain what they were experiencing. Like you could have somebody who's been through some major life crisis and actually come out of it quite well, but they just have difficulty expressing their innermost thoughts and how they felt. And that's, from a writer's point of view, is not very useful. So that was the main criteria. So I had in mind a range of events, and through my professional networks and just keeping my eyes open and ears listening, I found these people over a period of a year or so, and spent time with them when I could. The Ian Roberts story, which is, Ian Roberts was once a rugby league football celebrity, but he was the first person to come out as gay during his playing career. And I was interested in, what's it like to hold a big secret like that and to be in the limelight, trying to keep that secret and eventually leaving that out. Well, in that case, I just knew of his story and he was in the news again. And so I just contacted his agent, and Ian replied almost straight away. He's a great guy. He really does like to give back. So there were a couple of instances where I just reached out to people because I knew of their story, and I thought they might want to participate.
I think that's one of the stories that Angela's story particularly resonated with me for multiple reasons, and one of them being that I'm looking at writing a manuscript that has elements of that in there, although not like that. And I saw her, so I was watching ABC's You Can't Say That.
You can't ask that.
You can't ask that. That's what it is. You can't ask that. And I just read her story in here, and then I went off to do some research for my own writing, and I was watching this program, and there she was. And I thought, oh, that's the same woman, And it was really nice to put that face and what you said about the voice. I really felt that her voice particularly came across strongly in this, because I loved at the end of her story, like it was just about her like asking if her hair looks hot, like, I look hot like this, don't I? And I thought it was just, really got this enthusiasm and an idea of the kind of person she would be. I liked that.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have a story that... Yeah, go on.
Oh, I want to say the other thing I did with Angela, she still does hydrotherapy in, the big aquatic centre in Melbourne. And I went along to a hydrotherapy session with her, hydrotherapy field, with her physiotherapist and her carer. And I just loved the way she just squealed with delight.
Oh, yeah.
Every time she would walk along as if she was on the moon, because the water,
really?
Supported her.
Yep.
And that was just a lovely moment for me. And it also, that was how I experienced gratitude too, through these stories, was these people allowing me into their lives.
Yeah.
And me thinking, well, unless I'd set on this project to write this book, I wouldn't be meeting these wonderful, just endearing people and certainly inspiring people.
Yeah.
So from a writer's point of view, it was an absolute delight to get to know these varied people and see them in their varied circumstances.
You certainly did that. I suppose my next question was going to be, was there one, and this is probably the same as saying what's your favourite child, but was there one story that really resonated with you more? Because there sort of was for me. Some of them did in different ways. I just, Morris's story did appeal to me because there was that humour in it. Angela's story did, because I felt so many feelings reading her story, both as a parent and then as a woman of what she went through. And then I loved the scene where you write about what was his name? I've forgotten his name for a moment, with the wildlife.
Yes.
Steve?
Yes. Steve Garlick.
Yes, Steve Garlick, and walking along, and there's the hallway full of pouches with joeys in it. It's just such a beautiful image. So that's some of the ones that resonated, but really all of them did in different ways. Was there something for you?
Well, yes, you're quite right. It's like asking a parent who their favourite child is, and we love them all, and some we would spend more time with than others, or and that's probably true for me. I think when I go through those stories, and I've listened to the audiobook a few times as well, and that's narrated by Lewis Fitzgerald, who does it really well, and it adds another flavour to the menu or to the stories. Um, the one that really gets me in choked up every time is Sandra Bond's story of, her first pregnancy, her
Yep.
first time to be a mother,
Baby
and
Noah.
then
Yep.
she goes and has the scan on her husband's birthday. It's meant to be a lovely birthday present, and it's a scan that changes everything.
Yep. Yep.
And I've got 3 daughters, and I've been through the birth process uh, with them, and that gets me every time. I think also because she is a psychologist, and she'd worked with in the childcare area, where children are removed from their parents
Tough.
because of abuse and neglect. And I had
Yep.
also done that work, but as a forensic psychologist advising the Children's Court. So there were a number of levels in which probably just me as a person resonated with her story. But as I said, I love all their stories, but that one for some reason chokes me up the most.
Yeah, yeah. I can see why, having read that one as well, because I could actually place myself. You sort of think, oh, imagine going there, imagine this happening, imagine going back to your town and everyone knowing. And it was beautifully written. The way that you told their stories, I think you showed so much sensitivity to them, which is a good thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
What were some of the common things that you found across all of these stories?
I think when I was writing the final 2 chapters, so the second last chapter was where I'd bring it all together and say, oh, okay, this is what I've learnt. And the final chapter is the wisdom that our storytellers can offer us. I think what had happened for me is that their stories had washed through me, because I spent a good year just solidly writing up their stories one chapter after another. I knew which order they were going to be in. I'd done all the research. So I really was just being washed through by their stories. And I was really, really strongly aware that everybody had been on a hero's journey. They're all traveling at different points in their life, traveling a normal life. Like Angela was a 16-year-old schoolgirl. Morris was a 12-year-old schoolboy. Ian was, what he was when he was growing up, a normal kid, but he didn't see anything wrong with his attraction to other boys until his father said that, homosexuals are awful and all that sort of stuff. So there's a point where you're traveling along quite happily as if you're just going on a nice holiday, and then something comes from out of the blue and just wakes you up and turns your world upside down. And so that was common to every story. And then what I noticed was there's a choice when the person has to decide, okay, am I going to go through this experience, or, like we were saying at the beginning, just try and stay stuck where I was, somehow seeming to try and recreate what I've lost. So they all decided to go on this hero's journey. They all reached out and had allies and mentors. They all had to reach inside themselves, reflect on their experiences, gain insights, gain new skills. And when I say skills, not just physical skills or even cognitive skills, but emotional skills.
Yep.
And then they have to create a new meaning in life or new purpose. We're talking about opening to new possibilities.
Yeah.
And every one of the stories, they would then open to new possibilities or new ways of being. And that's the common thing. That's what struck me the most, is this hero's journey that everybody goes through. And the time period that you take varies for each individual, and you're not going to know in advance what that time period is going to be.
True, because it could take years for certain aspects of that journey to, to even accept the quest, I suppose, and then to to go through those different trials, and you know, you try it once and it didn't work this way, and then I give up, and you know, and there's always that point, isn't there, where you get only so far and you just think, no, I can't do it. And it's often when that sort of helper comes in and encourages you along.
And I know when I was writing up that section, you know, the Rocky movie series came to me, you know, that sort of movie where the down and out person, or the person that's not going to make it, you think, I mean, that's what the filmmaker wants you to think.
Yes,
Then sets this goal that seems impossible, and then has to wake up every morning. In Rocky's case, he had to do his boxing drills, he had to do his run in the morning. And, you know, real life is not like that, because it doesn't happen in an hour and a half. You know, that process of getting up every morning, resetting your goals, remotivating, has to happen day in, day out. And there's some times when we just don't do it.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
The despair kicks in, or we lose hope temporarily.
Yeah.
I experienced that myself. But, you know, we start to learn that, okay, that's normal. That's part of the process as well. And sometimes there's things I can do to lift myself out of that despair or that despondency more quickly.
Yeah. I think just on that idea of lifting yourself, writing some of these stories must have been difficult at times, and also in your previous work, working with people and some of the things that you became privy to. And I guess I wonder, how did you look after yourself during this time when you said stories that really brought you to tears and, you know, maybe shocked you? What sort of things did you do?
I develop a really good routine. I'm not a writer that has any problem sitting down to write. I mean, there's certainly times when I think, oh, I don't feel like getting started, but I do it anyway. And, you know, my writer's routine is often I always meditate in the morning. I may do some yoga or some other exercise, but typically I do some exercise at the end of the day. And when I was going through this intense year of writing, I would do something at the end of the day. There'll be a point, you know, mid-afternoon, late afternoon, where I just couldn't think anymore. So I would go and do some exercise, ideally in nature. But yeah, I would start in the morning after breakfast and all of that, with a coffee, sit down, and then I would very quickly get into the storytelling, you know, being a storyteller. And I found that I didn't actually feel like I used to feel when I was a psychologist and I was consulting with people, where I had to fix them. Here I was narrating a story. I didn't have to change the story. I didn't have to fix anybody. So it was this lovely sense of creativity and this idea that I was passing on this story to other people or to the readers. But certainly exercise, meditation, eating well, and ideally being in nature as much as possible was really helpful. As you know, having read the book, there's one scene more towards the end of the book where I do something myself, confronting a really old fear from my time working in the prison system.
Yeah.
And I had never felt ready to confront this fear before I'd embarked on this project. So that gave me the strength and the courage to go and confront this fear that I had. And in the end, I had to write that into the book because it was such a strong experience for me.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk to you about this so much more, but we have time for one more question. So this question is going to be not so much about the nature of suffering or being the sufferer, but how to be with that sufferer. So what are a couple of tips you have for us when we're sitting side by side with someone who's been through something that they cannot put into words properly and we can't truly understand? What should we do?
Well, I think it's a great question and such a worthwhile thing to contemplate. But I think the first thing is not to be scared of their suffering. You know, people can get really distressed, and that distress is appropriate, and just think, okay, they're distressed. I may not understand what they're going through, but the thing I can bring is my human presence. And we don't need to fix anything. We don't even need to say the right thing, because how do we know what the right thing is if we're not really experiencing what they're experiencing? So simply just being with the person, and that could be being with them in silence. It could be holding their hand or just doing activities with them. And some people who are going through that intense period of suffering need to tell their story over and over again. It's their way of arriving at acceptance, their way of trying to create some sense of it. And we can just be there to listen to their story. And once again, we don't need to fix it. We keep them safe. You know, we don't let them cross the road when they're not looking.
Yeah, yeah.
Or we might provide some meals or take them out for a walk. But really, it's just bringing your human presence and allowing them to express whatever it is that they need to express, and not being too judgmental about that. Over time, we can start to introduce, you know, other ideas and new perspectives, and that's what I call the expert companion, which is what I write about as I get later through the book.
Yeah, yeah. That's really, I think that gives people who've been watching today, I think that gives them a lot to think about, from both sides, from hearing what suffering is like, and then to how they can best be. And I think you are right, that idea of just having that human presence and just sitting beside them, that's just so powerful, and it can do so much more than trying to fix, or because you know what it's like when you're sitting there and your head's just going like, I've got to say the right thing, I've got to, like, what shall I say? But all they really want you to do is just be there with them. And I thank you for reminding us of that.
Yeah.
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 Well, like I said, I could ask a lot more questions, but we're out of time today, and I would just like to thank you so much for your time in chatting with me, also in writing this book, and for that sensitivity that you've shown in telling the different stories in there. And I wish you all the success with it.
Thank you, Monique. It's been lovely to chat with you, and thank you once again for your support of Australian writers. And good luck with your new book.
Yeah, thank you. Not long now. So thank you for tuning in to Stories on Stage Online today. For a thought-provoking read about growing through life crises, check out The Power of Suffering. It's available in print from bookstores and online sellers like Booktopia, and it's also in audiobook, as David mentioned while we were chatting. Next week, I'm not going to be here chatting with you, but I will be back on the 14th of July chatting with Ashley Kalajian-Blunt about her memoir, How to Be Australian. I just started reading it last night, and it was really making me laugh, because apparently coming from Canada and moving to Australia is very different. Thank you.